to bring someone's attention on something. I remember I did that in the video with an ankle break, like a literal ankle break, like a soccer player. She sort of didn't break her ankle, but actually, I don't know. She left on it.
I don't know. I'm not a doctor. I only play one on TV.
Exactly. But she did get carried off the field, so I'm not too sure. It wasn't, I don't know if it was a sprain, but anyway, I actually captured the moment it happened. So I sort of zoomed in on it, added like a bone cracking sound effect, and slowed it down.
All right, welcome to another episode of Game Day Glare. I'm Lance, and here's my boy E. Today, we're going to be talking about slow motion, the art of slow motion, E.
Yes, I think we should do the entire episode just moving and talking in slow motion.
That's it. The only problem is slow motion images look great, but slow motion audio sounds like crap.
True. Well, sometimes it can work. You know, if you're doing like a super, like a few seconds of slow motion and then you speed back up. It's kind of cool. The audio can sort of follow along. Great sound design. Maybe add some turntable scratch or I don't know, something, or rewind sound effect. I don't know.
But when you use SNQ on our cameras, there is no sound, right?
True. Well, that's the first thing, actually. That's sort of the first, well, should it be the first topic? Like, how do you get slow motion and how do you film it? And what settings you use?
Definitely. So we're going to have to cover frame rates, reasons why you use slow motion, when's the best time to use slow motion. So I'm going to start with you, E. Since you're the YouTube expert, why are all your videos in slow motion?
Because it's more cinematic. It is. No, it's true. Like, people like it. I like it, but there's a time and place, obviously. But I usually do it because I film everything in 4K 120, and if I didn't do it, it would be a waste of data. But yeah, no, I think it's like, it's not that I want, like, I very rarely do a video like with predominantly like slow motion footage. Like, it's usually more speed ramping that I'm after. So I want to be able to, like, if there's a catch or a shot or something, to be able to like slow it down and then just go back to normal speed and just sort of play with the pace that way. So that's the main reason why I'd film it at a high frame rate. But yeah, putting everything in slow motion, if there's, if it fits the purpose of your video, if you're doing like, I don't know, end of year sort of sobby recap where everybody's crying and type of thing, or you have like a super melodramatic music and you're doing a super dramatic video, like, obviously, like, slow motion is great, but it can be overdone. Like, that's I've definitely seen a lot of that. But I don't know. How about you? Where do you use it, or do you use it, I should say?
I do use it. It depends, honestly. Sometimes I'll use slow motion to stabilize shots.
Yeah.
Like, say if I have a good shot and it's a bit shaky or something like that, I'll use a bit of slow motion. Doesn't mean I have to go all the way. Like, so I'm usually shooting at 60 frames when I'm doing sports. I find that's enough for me. Sometimes I'll do 120, but most of the time I'm 60. If I'm doing corporate stuff, then that's when I'll use it. If I have a shake or something, then I'll slow it down. You can't even really tell if I'm doing, like, I don't know, real estate or something like that. Sports, it's a little different, right? Because obviously you want to slow down your main subject or the main play, and you're trying to highlight that part. So, I mean, it's always in the back of your mind. You're better off to shoot those extra frames to give yourself that option. Now, we've discussed this before on this show. Sometimes when I do sports, I'll film like 24 or 30. And I know when I'm filming that shot, I'm not slowing it down. Like, I'm purposely filming it with speed because I want to show how fast that play is. Now, I might have a GoPro or something else set up that's at a higher frame rate that I can still get a different angle of that to slow it down. But you always have to be conscious of what your purpose of filming the sport is, or what you want to show. So obviously in today's social media, slow motion is so important. You see it all over the place on your Instagram. So it's like, okay, I want to have the ability to have that shot. So that's why it's safer to film with a higher frame rate. Now, like I said, sometimes I don't play it safe, sometimes I do.
Well, I think like for the beauty shots are the ones usually that like have a lot of slow motion in them because, like you said, if there's not people, because during the game, if you slow it down, obviously everyone in the shot slows down as well. Where if you're doing like a beauty shot of, I don't know, like a hero shot of a player coming out of a tunnel or just the crowd establishing shot of some sort, just some color, then those are great in slow motion. But when it's the actual game, you don't want to play to go on forever. Like you want to quickly move on to the next play. So that's when it becomes a bit tricky to just overuse slow motion in that situation, I think. Anyway.
You think we should explain our timelines? So like we've talked about this before, but we'll bring it up again. So my timelines are 24 frame usually. I know if you're editing just for socials, your timeline should be 30 frames. But the idea is very simple. If you film 60 on a 24 timeline, you can slow it down to 40%. If you film 120 frames on a 24 timeline, you could bring it down to 20%. And if you film 240, which some people do, like some of your action cameras, or even our cameras, like our Sony ones, could do 240, but only in 1080.
Yeah.
You can slow it down 10%. Do you ever film in 240? That was easy math though.
Yeah.
240 divided by 24, 10. It's like boom.
Well, that's pretty good.
I also researched it, so I look smart.
Well, a lot of people are confused about it. Like, or a lot of people, I'd say the number one mistake with people who start, wanting to do slow motion is that they assume that, all right, I'm shooting in 60, then I'm good to go. But then they get into their editor and they just put the same frame rate because often you put the first clip in your sequence. So how do you want the sequence to match your clip setting? And then they click yes, and then they got a 60 frames per second clip and a 60 frames per second timeline, and then it just defeats the purpose. Now, if you're slowing it down, you're only showing half those. You're now showing 30 frames per second in a 60 frames per second timeline, and it just looks as bad. So yeah, there is a method. But to answer your original question, all that was to say that you're great at math, basically. But to answer your question, no, I've never filmed at 240 because I don't think I've ever. Oh no, I think my cameras that I have now do it at 1080, but I never shoot at 1080. So I never used that option. But to be honest, I think it'd be way too slow. Like unless you're filming like race cars, because it's not from me, but like the way I approach slow motion is that the faster the action is, the slower you can go, and it still looks good. Like for example, if you've got a basketball game, I could get away filming in 120 if it's like adults who know what they don't have to be the NBA players, but they still have to move fast, know what they're doing. The ball is moving quick, transition, driving with intensity, all that stuff. If I'm filming 10-year-olds, you slow them down to 20% speed, it's going to be a long clip, like, and it's not going to have the intensity. Like just because you slow it down, all of a sudden doesn't become dramatic and intense. It just becomes extremely slow. So yeah, the faster the action is, the more you can slow down your footage in post. So with super high frame rates like 240 and up, like you're talking horse racing, car racing, cycling, all that stuff. But other than that, personally, I wouldn't touch it.
Now, a lot of people also crank their shutter. Yeah. Do you do that? You use a higher shutter rate, so that basically you're cutting out the motion blur. It looks a little different too, but when you slow it down, it's crispy. So, what do you crank your shutter to? Like double or more?
A bit more. I do go higher because I find that it's sharper, and it just looks better, especially in slow motion. The downside is that if you don't put it in slow motion, that's when like the little jittery sort of jerkiness that comes with it is even more obvious at full speed. But in slow motion, it looks great. So it's like, but if I'm filming at 120, my shutter speed is usually 1/400.
Okay.
I don't go too crazy with it. Like it's not that bad, but yeah, maybe 1/320 sometimes, depending if I can afford the with my exposure. Huh?
Well, that's it. It's a double-edged sword, right? Because
Yeah,
if you crank your shutter too much, then you got to bump up your ISO. Or if you're
exactly.
in log footage, you got to really open up your iris, and then you could be getting stuff out of focus. Or if you're using ND filters, then that could be a quick cheat at least. I've done in the past where I crank my shutter. I don't do it often, honestly. The reason why I've done it in the past is I needed stills from game action. So it was an easy way to make sure I had crispy footage, like crispy stills, because there's no motion blur. Because if you ever tried slowing down your footage to get a quick still, well, you're going to see that motion blur, and the motion blur almost looks out of focus. So when you crank your shutter that way, and you take that screenshot or still from that video, it almost can pass as a photo. So that's the reason why I did it. But it does look a little weird, right? With no motion blur, like every time you see it, and like the NBA does it a lot. So like when you see the NBA clips on Instagram or TikTok, that's why they stand out. It's because they're cranking that shutter, and it looks good. It looks very, very good. But there's a fine line,
Yeah,
and especially for most amateurs, is they don't understand how to do it. Just cranking your shutter, like don't go over 400. Don't even that. If you're shooting 120, 400, I'd say is probably the most you want to go, because you're starting to get dark, and then you add a little grain to that image. It's going to bring the quality down. But
yeah.
when you do it
Well,
right,
it depends on the type of camera you're using as well.
yeah.
I'm filming in 10-bit, so I can afford to be a bit underexposed and just like push it back up in post. You know what I mean? But not everyone can do that.
Well, that's it too, right? Like you add in all these things, you make a good image, then you got to color correct, and you're taking more and more time. Now, not everybody takes that extra step.
Mm.
So if you're just going straight with a picture
That's why
profile,
they pay me the big bucks.
That's it. No, but on like color correction, we should do an episode just on color correction, because color correction is like a never-ending story. There's a million ways to do a million different colors and a million different things. Yes, everyone knows the basics, but it's perception. It's how you see it, what you feel is right, almost.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And I'm never really happy with the finished look. I'm always wondering if I did it. And sometimes it looks good on my computer, and then I watch it on YouTube or a year later, and I'm like, whoa, what was I thinking? It just looks weird. And yeah, that's the case with half my videos.
Even with Premiere, honestly, like one of the downfalls that everyone complains about Premiere is when you export clips, your color doesn't always look the same. So you got to add a LUT in, and then hopefully get that thing. Now I know we're off the topic of slow motion, but it all kind of goes together, honestly, at the end of the day.
Sorry, we're coming back.
Yeah, we're coming back. But like, you just released a YouTube video where you were using a gimbal. Now I watched your YouTube video, and your action. Yeah, that's it. Please subscribe now to be on the game. Okay.
Exactly.
But in your YouTube video, you did a lot of slow motion.
Yeah.
So what was the purpose of that? Like, what was your thought process behind that, producing that video in slow motion, just so maybe our audience understands like why and when we should use slow motion?
Well, there's two main reasons. The first one was probably going to make more sense for everyone. The second one was more of a personal thing. But first reason is because it was a gimbal video. I was filming everything on a gimbal, so there were camera movements, and I just thought slow motion was sort of making those movements look better. And yeah, just like the vibe of having like that slow gimbal move with the action. There's a shot where I'm walking alongside the court, like next to basically in line with the point guard as he's bringing up the ball, and I thought that was like really cool in slow motion. And there's a few drives to the basket as well that I just thought it just fit the purpose of that gimbal video. The other reason was that I used a mist filter that day, and a lot of people, because I did talk about it in the video and in the comments with a few people, where I was saying that like to me it was way too much. Like there was so much blooming around the lights, but also because the game started at 4, I think, in the afternoon, so it was still quite bright outside. So the windows are closed, but there's light sort of peeking through here and there, and there's LEDs, and there's even reflections on the cord. So all of those light sources are all sort of blooming, and there's sort of hazy sort of look everywhere. It felt like it was just too much. And because it had that sort of dreamy, bloomy kind of look, I was like, well, might as well go all in with it and just sort of make it slow motion. So it's almost, almost like it was on purpose, sort of a dreamy, slow type of vibe. And yeah, that was the that was the reason.
The shot that you're talking about where you're following the point guard, that was a nice shot because you had that layer of fans, like you were walking behind the first and second row. So it was a really nice shot, and you don't get to do that a lot in sports.
No.
Like you can't do that shot without a gimbal.
Yeah, no, definitely
not that smooth anyway.
No.
But if you're using a gimbal, yeah, I'm slowing it down a lot just to. Gimbals already look, well, at least the way I see it, when you're using gimbal, it always looks a bit odd. The footage, like you could tell, it's like too smooth. But when you slow it down, I find then you understand, like your brain sees it better, like, oh, okay, it's a slow motion shot. But when you just do a regular gimbal shot at full speed, it looks a little odd, I find. So for me, I always use it in slow motion, and it gets rid of those little minuscule shakes. And slow motion gimbal shots are amazing ways to start videos or to introduce a space or the hero shots. Like that's where you really, really want to use that slow motion. And since you're on a gimbal, it's a nice, smooth, perfect shot. So that's when I use them a bit. But do you use, like, all your gimbal shots, do you slow down usually?
Well, rarely. It was the first time I actually filmed a basketball game with a gimbal, so it's not something
Tough,
that yeah. Definitely following the ball was a bit tricky. Like I had a pretty wide shot. Like I was filming with a prime 35 millimeter lens, so it wasn't that hard to follow the action around the court, because let's say I'm in the corner or baseline, sort of on the edge of it, like I get a pretty good view of the entire half court. I just gotta move a little bit, but the ball though, like following it and getting to the basket, before, or not losing it as it's arcing up, like a 3-point shot, for example, like that was hard to sort of get it right with the gimbal without sort of doing a weird tilt with the joystick, or some sort of movement that just doesn't look, because obviously if I'm going to film with a gimbal, I want my movements to be steady and look good, so that I can't have I'm moving but at the same time playing with the joystick and the camera's going all sorts of directions. So there was definitely a bit of that going on at first, and I realized that it was easier to do it if I was filming from very low, because that way I was holding the gimbal like an inch off the floor, and so I was sort of looking upwards. So because I'm already looking upwards, it's easier to just follow the action that way, because I don't have to move the camera with the joystick that much. Because if I was to film straight up, then I would have to go up when the ball would go in the air. So yeah, there was ways around it, but yeah, it wasn't easy, definitely. Like it's possible, but it's not easy.
Gimbals are a lot of work. Like, you need to practice with a gimbal, and it's hard to do those moves. Like, you on socials, you see these guys with gimbals and they do these amazing moves, and you're like, wow, they make it look so easy. And then you get one in your hand, and you're like, okay, I can't do that. And then you're trying time after time again. And sometimes if you have a client around, they're like, what's this guy doing? Like, I thought he was a pro. Why is he having a problem with this gimbal? And you're like, well, I do a lot of stuff handheld. I don't use my gimbal that often. I know it looks pro. Like when you show up with the gimbal, everyone's like, whoa, this guy's serious. And then you take, like, I always adjust mine at home, so I know it's all weighted for what lens I'm going to do. So when I show up, I can pop it on. But there is the odd time where during traveling, one of the little locks comes undone and you show up to a job and you got to balance a gimbal under pressure. That's like the worst feeling in the world, because everyone's just watching you and you're like, don't worry, it's almost there. It's almost balanced.
Especially if it starts doing the
spin of death shakes. There.
Yeah. Right? Holy Ghost.
So when you were filming with this gimbal and you did this slow motion video, did you think of the slow motion process before or after?
Probably. Well, I knew I was going to use most of this stuff in slow motion, just because, as you said, like gimbal movements always look better, in my opinion anyway, in slow motion, or at least I was going to speed ramp most of it, but it's mostly I think after, like, especially once I saw the mist look, that I decided, like, yeah, everything's just gonna be in slow motion, and that'll be that. I think even I sent all my best shots to the local team, the thank you for letting me film, and I think I sent it all to them in slow motion as well.
You're, hey, you're like, I don't want them to see my weird gimbal movements.
Yeah,
So this way they
exactly.
have no choice. They're just going to get what I give them. So what other
Exactly.
gear do you think you need to achieve great slow motion? So obviously like a gimbal, um, like a glide
Well, you don't
cam.
really need a gimbal to do slow motion. Like, all you need
No, no,
really
no,
is a
just to enhance
camera.
it, to enhance it.
Oh, yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah. Yeah, well, there's sliders, but like now we're getting away from game day though. Like, I wouldn't use a
yeah,
slider
it's true. You're not going
at
to use a
game day.
slider during a game, you know?
You could, but it had to be like very specific moments, like, because it'd be cool to do like some sort of push in or something like that, or but I think sports are on such a big surface anyway. Like, a slider would have to be huge to be
Yeah.
useful in that situation.
Well, it'd be like
But
that robotic camera in the NHL that just hangs over the penalty boxes, slide
yeah,
back and forth, blue line and blue line.
yeah,
That
true.
what that's kind of like a slider.
Or that
But I think
spider cam at tennis and football as well. I think it's
in
like
amateur,
on strings, like, and just they sort of control it, and it just goes around in the air. It's pretty impressive.
yeah, actually, speaking of impressive, I took a screenshot. The Euro Cup has 47 camera positions, and one of them is the one you're talking about that goes like from end to end in that.
Mm.
It's a little off topic, but like the camera layout is insane. It's
Yeah,
insane. I'll show it on this clip. I'll share it on our socials, but it's crazy the camera layout that they have on this.
yeah, man.
For amateur sports, though, I think if you're doing slow motion, like action cameras are pretty good. Like obviously, if you have a high end Sony or Canon camera, you could shoot at the higher frame rate. But if you don't have a budget like that and you want to do some slow motion, some fun videos, like action cameras are a pretty good choice. Also, they all shoot high frame rates, and they're easy to use. You don't really have to worry about the colors and that because as long as it's well lit, the colors are very, very good on it too. Yes, on the new GoPro, you can shoot in a log profile, but if you don't have the newest one, even the old ones, you can go up to 240, you can go 4K 60. Like it gives you quite a bit of options. Now, you don't really use action cams too often, eh?
No, it's been a while. I used to when I needed like a second camera when I was filming soccer or something. I would put like a camera behind the goal just to make sure that I get it if I missed it with my main camera. But yeah, it's been a while since, and also my GoPro. Yeah, there was a bit. It's still there's a technical difficulty with it where sometimes it just stops recording, like after, let's say, like 30 seconds, which is the most annoying thing. Like, if it stopped, like if you're playing, you're pressing like start record, and then it stops 2 seconds later, it'd be fine. I'd just restart and just wait a bit, see that it works, and then move away. But now it's just long enough so that you're like, oh yeah, I think it's working, and then you move away, and then it shuts down, and then you realize 30 minutes later, and then you missed what you were trying to capture. So I don't really trust it, therefore I don't use it much.
So I have 211s. I had a 9 before. I had issues with the 9. It would overheat, but I'm shooting like my GoPro's running for like 45 minutes straight at 4K 60. So it gets hot, right? Anyway, I got an 11 and I've had no issues with it. Now, um, I use them for hockey or for cameras that I could put down low and leave also. And the reason why I always shoot them in a higher frame rate is just in case, right? Just in case I want to slow it down. But they're really good and they're usually reliable. I mean, yours isn't, but most of them are. But when you see the promos for these videos,
Yeah, it looks
man,
much
they look
better.
amazing. And they're all using slow motion. They're using speed ramping and slow motion like to the best of its abilities. So you see this and you're like, my footage and my edit is going to look exactly like this.
Yeah, never does.
No. So basically the camera could do that stuff. It's you that can't get the results, okay?
Yeah. Well, even then, I'm not. I'm not 100% sure all these GoPro ads are filmed with GoPros, but Yeah, that's
It's
just
because we don't have friends that could do 360 flips on bikes,
yeah,
jumping down a cavern with a parachute on their back. That's the
yeah.
difference, right?
Well, I can see how like all the outdoorsy stuff, the underwater stuff, maybe, but even the underwater stuff, like there's not that much light underwater. Like it's just because action cameras lose a lot of quality as soon as there's not tons of light around. So yeah, I struggle to believe that all these shots are coming from a camera that
They
has
are
such a small sensor.
they are filming in the bluest, clearest water. Okay, because when
Eh.
they go deep down, it's bright. Yes, they must have lights or they must do something to plan those shots.
Oh, maybe yeah.
But I mean, an action cam for a sports like camera bag, I think is a necessity. Just as a backup or just for different angles, it's something you can leave. It definitely helps. And honestly, same idea. Film at a higher frame rate, edit in your timeline, like 24 or 30, and you're fine. And it's pretty crisp. Motion blur. There isn't really much motion blur though in these action cams. I find like I feel like they're at a higher shutter speed because I do find them pretty crispy, and you don't see the motion blur
So
as
you don't
much.
set it manually?
No, 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 no. I mean, what I did is I have settings that I keep that like a way I want to look. Like I don't have it on like have it a bit flatter in that. But no, I don't. I just let it go automatic. Sorry, I said the bad word, eh? Automatic.
No,
Or
no, no,
pro.
no.
Sorry, everything's on manual. Even my GoPro, I do it all manual. I do honestly though. I do adjust it sometimes from the app. The app works really, really good. So like even when I have both cameras on my app. I could toggle back and forth. I could check both images. The only thing is though, once you're recording, you don't get that image anymore. The second you press record, your preview is gone, which sucks. Like I wish you could still see it while it's recording because sometimes someone knocks over your camera, or if you have it against like say at hockey, I have it on the boards as there's a big hit. Sometimes it'll tilt down and it changes your angle. It'd be nice to kind of know live. Like when you're checking your phone, I want to see that. Supposedly it's talk in one of the updates. I do want to try a 360 cam though. I haven't really played around with one of those, and now you can shoot 120 4K with them, so it's pretty cool. Well, actually, they actually have 8K, but the base is 120 4K, so you could really slow that down.
You said you film at 60.
Yeah,
So do you always go normal sort of 60 frames per second with audio and all that, or do you go S&Q?
I go normal with audio. I want the audio because what I'll do is I'll slow down a clip and I'll play the audio at regular speed sometimes because the fans cheering and all that does you don't need to slow it down. So I'll keep the audio and the video separate, and I can keep the audio because you can, especially like say in a play, there's a touchdown or a goal, the fans are cheering and all that. So even if your clip is slower, you obviously once they score the higher cheer part, I'll time that. But the noise before and the noise after doesn't really matter. What about you? You'll do that too?
Yeah. Well, in 120, but yeah, because yeah, S&Q. I use my S&Q mode is set to do time lapses basically. I'll set it to 1 frame and recording at like 20 frames per second, which is always the timeline that I edit in. So yeah, if I go to S&Q is to do a time lapse and it just records 1 frame per second, and still I usually speed it up in post because even that it's a bit slow sometimes depending what it is. But as far as slow motion is concerned, I think like because S&Q really is sort of an older thing because it used to be that like to record in slow motion you kind of had to use it. That was the only way with old DSLRs. I mean, and what it would do is that it would record, let's say, 60 frames per second, but it would produce a 30 frames or a 24 frames per second clip that's already slowed down. And it still exists because and that's basically, don't quote me on what I'm about to say, but from what I understand,
Your math isn't that good, or what?
no, but I think like technically, like S&Q is still the best way to get that slow motion footage at the highest quality possible. because the transformation is done in camera and it's done properly and at the right speed and all that sort of stuff. And the frames are just right. Where if you do it in post, they might, depending on the software that you use, they might skip frames in a way that was not that is not ideal. Like it's still going to be 95 to 98% there, but it's not as perfect as just doing it in camera. So that's what I understand. I could be wrong. If I am, let me know in the comments. But yeah, so a lot of people and a lot of cameras as well is like, especially if you're on the cheaper side, is that you'll still again have to go to SNQ to go to higher frame rates. So like if maybe your camera does 60 frames per second with audio and everything, but if you want to go higher than that, then you got to go SNQ mode, which means that there won't be, like if people didn't realize that by now, when you film in SNQ mode, there's no audio. So that's always the sort of downfall. And also your clips come straight out of camera, slowed down already. So if you want to play it at full speed, you have to go the other way around. You have to speed up your clips to just bring them back to full speed. And it always looks a bit weird. It's never
it doesn't work.
Speeding up a clip versus slowing it down, even though technically it's the same thing, just in reverse. It never looks great. It's not that.
It's the motion blur.
But it's exactly.
The motion blur doesn't look proper. Yeah. So my S&Q, since I have the A7 IV right here, my S&Q is 120 frames, 1080p.
Okay.
But then there's no audio. And the same thing, like, FX6, great camera. If you want to shoot 120, you have no sound.
Yeah, that's true.
So, which is crazy for an expensive camera like that. You would think if the FX3 can do it with sound, why can't the FX6? So these are things that you got to think about when you're buying cameras or when you're working with cameras, is like, you're like, okay, I got that 120 frame rate, but then if you have no sound, well, shit, what's the point? You do need that sound. Like, obviously, like what we've been saying is you don't need to shoot at these higher frame rates. You do it in case. You want the sound. You don't always need it, but you have it in case, because especially in sports, big plays happen. So sometimes there's cool crowd reaction or the way the crowd reacts. You want to have that sound, and you want to have those extra frames to slow it down. But I rarely use S&Q, honestly. Like, I remember using it on the FS 700 when it came out, and filming it. It was the only way to get slow motion. And when you used it, when you stopped recording, it would then buffer your clip, and you have to wait like 15, 20 seconds. So you're sitting there and your camera is buffering, and you're like, okay, but I'm missing action. So it kind of turned you off from S&Q. So then when Sony did fix it and put it on other cameras, I wasn't interested. I was like, oh, listen, I'll shoot at 60 and I'll make it work from there. Because like 40% is slow. Obviously 20% is slower, but 40% is slow enough.
Did you see that new Canon camera that just came out?
No.
It's like a C400, which is
okay.
There's 300s and there's 500s and there's even 700s, I think. But there's a C400. It's like 6K, I think, and does 120 frames, all of that with no crop, full frame, all that stuff. Anyway, I'm
what's the price tag if it does all that stuff?
It's not that bad. It's actually, I think it's like 7,000.
Okay.
And it's a big, like full frame, big body type, probably the size of an FX6, tons of buttons on the outside, like you can do a bunch of stuff, like all the different frame rates you can imagine, but different modes and stuff. So not everything is on 6K, but yeah, I was surprised by I thought, because like usually Canon, when they do like a camera like that, it's usually in the $12,000-$15,000.
Yeah. It's like FX9 prices and stuff like that. Right?
Yeah. So I was a bit surprised. Like, not that $7,000 is nothing, but I don't know. I can't remember where I saw it, but it was really quickly. I need to watch a proper Gerald Undone video about it to really know what's going on.
All right. So, what are your reasons, now that we talked about gear, what are your reasons for using slow motion?
Well, I think, Yeah, mostly like you said, as a backup. Like you always want to have that option when you want it, when you need it, because you never know actually when you're gonna need it. So you can always, like you do, just decide before you even shoot that this is not gonna be that type of video, and you're gonna record at 24, and that's gonna be that. And there's nothing wrong with that. But for me, I kind of like to have that in my back pocket. And there's also like sometimes if you need to do, if your video needs to be like 2 to 3 minutes and you only have one game to shoot it, um, being able to play with speed ramping and slowing down things can, because you might not get that many good clips. So like it's good to have the speed ramping option to make clips that are sort of good or a bit average, and turn them into something a bit more dynamic, a bit more fun to watch. And by playing with the speed and then the movement and stuff, like you can, yeah, you can make footage look better than it actually is. Where I feel like at 24 frames, I'm a bit more limited in that sense. Like my shots have to be good, and if I want to do like some sort of, quick whip transition at the end of the play, I have to do it in camera. Like I can't just do it by like speed ramping. Well, I guess if I'm speeding up, doesn't really matter. But yeah, I just feel like it gives me more tools in post production to play around with what I've got, which sometimes is not much. So might as well put all the odds in my favor.
I think you hit the nail on the head when you said if you're editing a longer video, then you have time to use that slow motion, right? And when I film in 24 or 30, I'm thinking more of a reel where I don't have that much time. Like honestly, like let's be honest, reels, you have a 35-second reel, you've already lost people. Like people want to see stuff fast. Like even, you know what, our social clips that we post up, ones that we put from 7 to 15 seconds do a lot better than ones that go from up to 30 or 35 seconds, and it's
Yeah.
crazy. People just don't have the time. So if you're doing a one shot of a clip for a reel, then yeah, you have chance to slow it down if it's that one shot. If you're doing an edit, you don't have time to do it on a reel to use your slow motion, I feel like. But when you have, when you're doing like a player profile video or a team video, then yeah, that's when you want to use slow motion, especially like, those nice up close shots, the entrance shots. I mean, we've all seen it 1,000 times. The guys walk into the locker room shots, like at regular speed, it doesn't look as good. Slow motion, it looks cool, like you see this pack of guys walk in and he's in their suits and walk into the room, and slowing it down looks like, looks really good. So that's where I think it's very, very important.
But the other thing as well, like in terms of like having options for me, is that I might have one video in mind. Let's say I'm doing this for a reel, but let's say you're working for a team. So you're doing a reel, you're probably not going to slow down anything if, maybe one clip or whatever. But then that same game that you film, you might use some of the best plays from that game in a recap at the end of the year, where that video is going to be much more dramatic. It's going to be a longer video, might not even make socials, probably just like a team presentation thing. And it's a super dramatic thing. And you have all these highlights in slow motion and stuff. So there's often more than one purpose to a clip. So from that perspective, I always try to back myself with the option, because I never know what the second or third use of that clip is going to be.
Exactly. And think about it. A couple of years ago, we didn't have these options. We would take a clip and put it in our Final Cut Pro back in the day and slow it down, and it would look like crap. And then we'd throw a look on it and be like, oh, okay, here you go. It's vintage, or it's that. Where even now, like when I do drone shots, I'm constantly filming at 4K 60. And my drone is smooth, but it's just in case I want to slow it down or have a better speed ramp and then come into that slow motion. Like it's all in case. And we're lucky in this day and age that we have the options to film at a higher frame rate just in case. I mean, yes, it does take more storage, and it's not always practical because, our Sony cameras like mine could overheat if I'm filming 2 cards at 4K 60 for 2 hours and it's using more batteries and more juice. But I'm willing to take those risks to actually slow down a shot, because slow motion is very trendy right now too. You see it everywhere. And if you go back, what I'm going to say 5 years ago, you didn't see as much slow motion as you do now. But not every camera was able to do slow motion. Like look at our iPhones and Samsung phones; they all shoot slow motion. Now there's a slow motion feature where it's kind of like an S&Q, where it actually films the clip in slow motion. So that is another reason why we see it all over the place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure, it can look cool as well, but especially well for social. I mean,
So who does slow motion good on social that you've noticed?
Premiere connoisseur.
There you go. There you go. Like saw my California video, did you?
Exactly. Yeah, no, I don't know. That's a good question. Well, there's so much of it. I don't know. It's hard to say, but like to your point, I think these days the stuff that I watch and that I really get into is more fast paced. It's like quick transitions that like you don't even see coming, and like by the time you just like you notice it, it's like, oh, that was amazing, but it's already gone. You almost have to watch the video a second time just to sort of pay attention closer to these little transitions that are like half a second, and because everything is moving too fast, and you know they'll do those transitions where it'll be like let's see, it'll be like photos, and it's like it'll cut to like different players but in the exact same position, but it's actually video, so it's like it's moving but it's like changing from one player to the next, and it's like just everything's happening so fast. And that's sort of the type of content that I'm into, that I watch or that I pay attention to, I should say, on Instagram. So slow motion, I don't know, I think it's like you said, it's hard to use it appropriately on a 20 to 30-second clip. But do you have any examples?
Well, we were talking before our podcast started, right? About the Celtics. You know, they won their 18th championship. Like their social team is killing it, right? Like even ESPN copied, that masking shot.
Yeah,
So ESPN came out with a pregame video, and they did it with Luka shooting over Gobert, and they acted like they created it, and everyone's like, it's like, yo, you copied my homework, and they did all these posts like that. But the Celtics do a really good job of mixing it up. So in the final game where they won the title, just before halftime, a guy hit a shot from half court. So obviously it's on their socials, but then the next day they showed different angles of it in slow motion, just that one clip. But they put it to like very, very dramatic music, and then the sound goes silent, and then it swishes, and in that clip it really, really worked good. But then they did another edit after they won, kind of like a recap of the series, to no music, and it was just ambient sounds like a swish or a dribble or sneakers. And that was it was a 35-40 second video. So like, well, that's it, it's too long, but they just won the championship, so it's getting a lot of traffic. They really mixed and matched slow motion well in it. So it was like all pretty much normal pace. And then every now and then when the shot's going in the net or a big play, then it was slowly going to slow motion, then speed back to regular speed. But it's tricky. Like there's a fine line. There's an art behind slow motion. It's even sometimes, like, I don't know about you, but I'll try stuff in a timeline. I'm like, oh, that's too much, or it's not the right time. I'm looking for like a slower part in the song where I could slap that slow motion clip in. Because if you're cutting to fast music in that, it doesn't fit. So it's tough. Like you kind of got to play around with it and find that little sweet spot. And now sometimes you don't care. You have a clip and you're like, this just looks amazing in slow motion. I don't care what anyone thinks. Here you go. But anyway, back to the original question. I think the Celtics are the ones that are really, really doing good. And I think they're doing good because they're mixing it up. Like that whole masking shot dribbling, like they've done it now 4 or 5 times to the point where you're like, okay, is this all they're going to do now? And then boom, they give you something completely different. You're like, oh shit, okay. Like, and it's something silly. Like even the other day, like working for a sports team, one of their posts that I liked was when after they won the championship, it was just like a punch clock and had the start date of the season and the end day of the season. And they're like, yo, we're done. Because they created a lot of content this season and a lot of viral
Yeah,
content. Like,
yeah,
and it takes a lot of work, and just to come up with the ideas too. Like, obviously, the masking video we saw, they didn't get that right on the first try. Like, they probably have to try a couple games and see what works and make sure the lighting doesn't change, make sure this doesn't change, and figure it out, because they set like a new standard with that. When other people are copying your shot or your edit, you've done good.
no, it's true. Yeah, that's very true. And I am a big fan of their content on Instagram and TikTok.
And my other one that does really good slow motion videos on Instagram is Wake Forest Baseball.
Okay.
I spoke about this before. They do like a lot of good slow motion shots of guys interacting with each other. So like the pitcher's going to the mound, or the pitcher and the catcher are talking, or the elbow bump after a home run. And those shots look beautiful. First of all, their color grading is really, really good. They have like this vintage yellow tint to it. So that right away, once your colors are nailed, like, it already makes it look better. But when you have like, you're the low angle and you have the guys jumping and bumping elbows, but you see the dirt coming off their cleats, slow motion now when they hit, like, it's really, really good. And they'll post just shots like that. They'll just post a slow motion clip. They don't really put like big edits on their socials, but these clips are so clean that that's all you need anyway. It gets you, gets you scrolling. And that's the idea, right? It's get people scrolling.
Well, do you think there's like, do you think there'll be, I'm putting you a bit on the spot, but would there be a new way? Is it possible one day that there'll be sort of a new way that like slow motion somehow, I don't know, there's a new trick, new style, new look, something new that's never been done before. That's like, do you think that there's still room to grow and create new things and new ways to do things with speed, whether it's speeding up or speeding down?
Oh, for sure. The more frame rates you get, right? The slower you can get. But I guess what the trick will be is how you mask it or how you use that footage in After Effects. Like, when we were kids, okay, Upper Deck used to take, like, whenever Upper Deck hockey cards and baseball cards and that came out, remember they used to do a shot of a guy doing a slap shot, and you had like all the phases of his slap shot, because basically, and all it was a high shutter camera that they just shot him, and then they would mask out each one. And more people are doing that with slow motion for video, and the limits are, it's you have an endless limit of what you could do. It's just, are you willing to put in the time? Because like, just masking that Boston Celtics shot, how long do you think it took to edit that clip? Like, you're talking a day, maybe two. I mean, if you're just like, okay, I'm average in After Effects. I don't, and I'm being generous when I'm saying I'm average in After Effects. I don't use it a lot. I use it for titles. I'll use it for a couple effects here and there, but my go-to is not going to After Effects. So you have to be very, very skilled in After Effects to be able to do that. And if you are, then yeah, you could do a lot with slow motion. And obviously, like, what is it, the Phantom camera that shoots like, I don't even know how many frames a second.
I think it's 960. 960?
960?
I could be wrong. I think it is.
Okay, so like that is basically like you could,
anyway.
like, your image is like freeze frame, like, you know what I mean? It's almost like having stills or a time lapse on your timeline.
Yeah. And also, like, it's a lot of footage. Like, filming with a camera like that, filming 10 seconds is a lot, because it's 1,000 frames per second, and yeah, so you can't. It's not that like, oh, it's gonna be a lot of data on my hard drives. It's just it's card management. Like, your cards are not like 4 terabytes, so you're constantly swapping cards, and you gotta have like data wrangling sort of figured out. So yeah, it gets complicated.
The cool thing about slow motion is you can highlight key moments, key goals, when a player scores, key reactions, and it really, really emphasizes it. So I think that's why, especially in sports, we see so much slow motion. Like, a nice hit in football in slow motion looks so good.
Oh, yeah.
And it really emphasizes that
if you
moment.
can like zoom in on something, and slow it down as you zoom in, and then zoom back out, and then goes back to full speed. Like that's definitely gonna trying to bring someone's attention on something. I remember I did that in a video with an ankle break, like a literal ankle break, like a soccer player. She sort of um that didn't break her ankle, but actually I don't know. She left on that.
I don't know. I'm not a doctor. I only
Yeah,
play one on TV.
exactly. But she did get carried off the field, so I'm not too sure. It wasn't. I don't know if it was a sprain, but anyway, I actually captured the moment it happened. So I sort of zoomed in on it, added like a bone cracking sound effect, and slowed it down. So definitely your attention is on it. And so you can do the same thing with a tackle, with the ball getting through the hoop or whatever the case may be, a slap shot, something. So yeah, these are definitely tools. Zooming in and slowing down time, and also like using sound effects and low pass as well. If you're slowing down the footage, then you're using a low pass effect on your audio to make it sound all muffled and sluggish. Yeah, all these things are definitely they're used to bring attention to something, and it's usually a big moment.
Actually, you know what? I'm happy you brought up sound effects, because if you just do a slow motion clip with no sound effect, it doesn't look the same. The second you put that sound in there, it totally enhances it. Now, you have a sound effects pack that you push on your channel. Now, do you have any slow motion sound effects, or is it just all real time, or you can slow them down as you go?
Yeah, exactly. They are real time, but they can be slowed down. And then you can. I tried to make them as clean as possible so that you can then sort of add a bit of echo, a bit of. I didn't want to give like slow effects that already had that old empty gym echo in them, for example, and then you're sort of stuck with that. You can't get rid of it. So I'd rather keep it clean, and then you can add whatever you want to it. So same thing with the speed of it. There's obviously like if there's a swoosh sound, like as in the basket going through the nothing but net basketball, there'll be like several different versions of it. There'll be like 10 or 12 different versions. So obviously some are slower than others, but yeah, you can always just slow them down and sort of bring them to your liking.
It's funny in basketball. I always find it weird when you do see someone do a slow motion shot, but they kept the sound at the real speed of the swish.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, okay, well, that doesn't work. Like with the crowd, it's fine. But when you have the actual shot of a swish, like hockey's different, right? A slap shot, you're going to hear the stick and the puck. You don't really hear it hitting the net. But basketball, that swish is like the iconic sound. So I feel like you got to slow it down to match it,
Yeah, I feel you. I'm trying to think if that's what I do. I think I do. I definitely slow them down, but probably not as slow.
No, it doesn't have to be
the footage. Yeah.
But it has to be a bit
especially
slower.
If I'm at 20% speed, it'd be like
oh yeah, because you're always 120. You're always 120. I know.
No, but I think also what happens often is that when I slow down a basketball shot, the moment it hits the net, that's when I ramp it back up usually. So that's why I was trying to think, do I do that? Because often the actual contact with the net is at full speed in my videos. I mean, that's usually when I'm
going to put you on the spot now before we wrap this up, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So I hire you to film an event or a game. What shots are you going in and saying, I want those in slow motion before the game starts? Like what's on your shot list? What are you trying to get in slow motion?
Well, it depends on the sport, I guess, but definitely anything that's like warm. Well, yeah, everything that's warm up related, definitely the player presentation and things like that. As far as the game is concerned, usually like a good drive, there'll be some speed ramping to it because I don't want to show the player just sort of going from the 3-point line to the basket. Like it's going to be way too long if I just leave it at full speed or put it in slow motion the entire time. But what I'll do is I'll speed it up and then slow it down when he maybe goes around the defender or something, and then ramp it back up, and then slow down as he's getting in the air to dunk. And then as soon as he makes contact with the rim, that's when I just go back to normal speed. so that way you get sort of that impact, and then the dunk sound effect will be at full speed as well, and they'll just I'll that will be my main sort of speed ramping happens when players are driving to the basket. I'll do also 3-point shots just because they're too slow. It's just like you don't want to watch the ball sort of. So you'll just, but sometimes I don't even speed ramp. I just cut. Like I do a lot of like jump cuts, especially if there's like beats, like very obvious like beats in my music. Then I'll just on that beat, I'll cut from the player sort of doing the release, and then the last sort of second before the ball sort of hits the basket. And because you cut so much, it almost looks like two different shots.
Yeah, because the way plays develop, right? It's hard. You can't say I want this play in slow motion. You'll look at it later on the edit, and you'll decide where you're cutting. That's why we're just being safe of filming at higher frame rates. Things that I want to focus on is like anything in the locker room. I want to have it where I'm going to use it probably in slow motion. Player interactions. Say if I'm doing hockey, when the guys are interacting with each other on the bench or and warm up in that I want in slow motion. Or I'm filming with a purpose to slow it down. And impacts, like in hockey, football, hits. You got to have those extra frames to slow it down in case. Now you might, depending on what you're editing for, might play at normal speed or faster, but I definitely feel like you really want that in slow motion. And honestly, exterior shots, player arrivals, those are a must. They're a must. And honestly, even at the end, when the team's celebrating, that always looks really, really good in slow-mo. You know, like guys' reaction, they're smiling, they're happy, they're high-fiving, they're waving their sticks or taking off their helmets. Those are cool pieces to have at a higher frame rate in case you slow it down. But that's what's hard about sports, right? Like I'll use your saying spray and pray. But when you're filming sports, you have an idea of what you want to capture, but you can't, it's not scripted. So you're capturing whatever's happening in front of you. And, you know, you try and be prepared for whatever's going to happen in front of you.
Yeah. At the same time, I'll say like my last piece of advice before we wrap it up would be like make sure you understand actually how this works in terms of like the frame rates. Like if you're filming in 60, then you're editing in 30. The idea is that once you slow down your footage to, if you got 60 frames per second footage, if you slow it down to 50% of the original speed, now you're only showing 30 frames per second. So in a 30 frames per second timeline, that's perfect. You're right on the money. And if you were to go a little bit faster, let's say you were slowing it down to 70%, you'd be good. I think it's ideally you want to stay sort of in the on the money basically, but it's still gonna. What you don't want to do is go lower than that, because if you're slowing your 60 frames per second, let's say to what, I'm gonna do bad math here, but like if you go lower than 50%, you're gonna be showing less than 30 frames per second, and that's when it's gonna start looking like you're skipping, especially in sports where there's it's going to be a bit choppy. There's going to be frames missing. And so that's the math that you always have to do in your head on like knowing how slow you can go. So like you said, if you're editing in 24 frames per second, then you can go a little bit slower. And if you're filming in 120, then you can go even slower. But yeah, just make sure you know what the limit is, and it's all math. And there's plenty of YouTube videos explaining how it works. I won't do it here because I'm going to make mistakes, and also it's more of a visual thing.
We've already proved that my math is better than yours, okay?
Yeah, definitely.
So, but I took the easy ones because I had notes right here on the my right-hand screen. But honestly, yeah, if you'll notice, if you go too much, if you take, I don't know, a 60 frame clip and you throw it on a 30 frame timeline and you put it down to 30%, you're going to see the difference and it's not going to look good. And you're going to make that adjustment right away. So today's episode was just basically to tell you guys how we do it, why we do it, and hopefully it helps you guys in your future projects. And sound effects. So if you need a sound effects package, check out Ease Beyond the Game. No, honestly, I know it's a shameless plug, but at the same time,
It's actually
it
on sale
will.
at the moment.
That's it. It's on. There you go, guys. So we'll put a promo code in the description below. But honestly, it
SFX20.
really what?
SFX20 promo
There
code.
you go.
Who knows?
But it really helps make your slow motion clip a lot better. So that's it for today. We don't have no Q&A or anything today. We didn't plan that.
I forgot.
You didn't plan that. You had one job. You had one job.
Sorry. Next time.
All right. Well, that's it for today's episode of Game Day Glare on slow motion.
Yes. See you next time.